welcome to the webinar on Vaccine Impact, Heightened Security Risks on Pharma Supply Chains and Cargo Theft, jointly organized by TAPA, PSI, and Eli Lilly. Let me introduce our panelists we have today. Ramesh Raj, Regional Director for Asia Pacific, Pharmaceutical Security Institute, PSI. And we have Raymond Velez, Regional Security Manager for Asia from Eli Lilly and Company. Next, we have Silva Raj, Board Member of TAPA Asia Pacific. He's also the Head of Infrastructure, Safety, and Environmental Sustainability and Engineering and Security at Boehringer Ingelheim. And for today, our moderator is Malik. He is actually our IIS committee from TAPA Asia Pacific. He also is the Regional Marine Loss Control Manager at AIG APAC Holdings. Thank you, Malik. So over to you right now.
Yeah, okay. Good afternoon, or maybe good morning, because I do see we have some participants from Middle East. A very warm welcome to everyone. As Samantha said, my name is Malik. I'm the moderator for this webinar. Yeah. Okay, we are now hopefully in the process of recovery. Maybe some or maybe may not agree with me. Yeah, but anyhow, I'm an optimist. After going through over a year of chaos and disruption over our economic activities, work environment and social interaction. Now, government, pharma companies, health and medical experts are actually working very hard, scrambling, trying to find a cure, a so-called cure or a vaccine to combat this pandemic. At the last count, when I checked on the WHO website, there are actually more than 50 companies or candidates that are working on trials, but I'm sure Roy will disagree because we just discussed, he said that there are more than 200 actually working on the COVID vaccine. Excluding the Russian, there are actually 3 companies which have been given approval to work on the vaccine. And as we know, currently there are 3. They are actually rolling out and sending their supplies to different parts of the world. As we know, we have Pfizer, BioNTech, Moderna, China, Sinovac. So this brings us to the topic that we're going to discuss, and the question that comes to mind. With the global demand far exceeding the current supply, what do you think will be the major risk to the supply chain and eventually down the line to the consumer? Maybe for this question to kickstart, I will ask our PSI rep from Ramesh. Over to you.
All right, thanks Malik. Hi everyone, good morning and good afternoon to wherever you're tuning us from. The first webinar is always the most difficult one. This is my first for 2021, but you know, with vaccines and supply chain being the very in topic, the most trendy topic, I trust that for 2021, that will be most of our discussion for this year moving forward. So yes, this is a very interesting question and it's a very long question. So I think I will hog the limelight a bit longer than most, but all right. So, okay. So countries, as we know now, countries must prepare for the biggest simultaneous global public health initiative ever undertaken, right? Delivering a new vaccine for COVID-19 worldwide will be one of our biggest challenges faced by the modern pharma industry and in fact the entire supply chain as well. The difficulties are intensified by pre-existing shortcomings within the supply chain. We have to remember that we were not prepared for this. But before we even mention that, what is actually a legitimate supply chain? Well, in my opinion, it is an end-to-end spectrum. What do I mean by that? A supply chain is the network of all individuals, organizations, resources, activities, and technology involved in the creation and sale of a product. A supply chain encompasses everything from the delivery of source materials from the supplier to the manufacturer through to its eventual delivery to the end user. That's what I meant by it. But of course, all of us will have a different interpretation, but we can hear that along as we go. So vaccines, of course, as you know, ultra cold, right? For at least for the Pfizer vaccine, which will require a cold chain approach. Countries receiving this type of vaccines will have to plan for the ultra cold chain transport and storage at least a minus 70 degrees Celsius. Existing vaccines do not typically require such an ultra cold chain. So many countries will be in need to develop such an ultra cold chain infrastructure to store these vaccines. This will be a particular huge concern to economies and countries that are in a slightly less developed state. And of course, those with large geographical, remote, and rural populations as well. So this will be one of the key concerns. Next, delivering the vaccines to these challenges will again require huge. So delivering these vaccines will also be a huge challenge and require collaboration and coordination at all levels of government, in particular across national and subnational structures, decentralized healthcare systems, and among public-private sectors and non-profit organizations as well. All right, so then we have manufacturing capacity as well. This will be another challenge because companies not knowing which will be approved first has to make an educated guess and go ahead with the manufacturing. But obviously, it's after the fact now we know who won the race in coming out first. But then again, we have to understand that the race is not over. Uh, just before this conversation, we were actually discussing how many possible vaccines were were lined up, and according to Ray, if I'm not mistaken, so almost about close to 200 vaccines. So clearly, the race is far from being over. So there will be a lot of players coming into this industry. The challenges that lie ahead. The pressure on the supply chain networks to deliver the safe and effective vaccine is immense and will continue to grow. And at the same time, the pharmaceutical industry must maintain and strengthen the supply chain for existing treatment and services. This is what I mentioned earlier as well. The benefits of the modern pharma supply chain that fits today's challenges will long outlive the COVID-19 pandemic because, in short, this will actually gear us and improve the infrastructure that we have and work towards facing the next pandemic, hopefully not so soon. But in the midst of all this is my favorite and obviously my most pet topic, criminal activity. As I see it, this will be one of the biggest challenges, especially for the pharma industry, pharmaceutical crime. Pharmaceutical crime is now worth more than $200 billion a year. Due to the widespread demand of COVID-19 vaccines, um, criminals have made efforts to capitalize on this. The whole seizures that was done in 2020 by Interpol, Europol, and the various law enforcement um, agencies is a testament to this. Next would be the smart tracking systems, right? Built into primary and secondary packages. This again will be a huge challenge for us in how you manage record, how do you keep track the activities throughout the entire supply chain. This is relating to real time, giving valuable information about the shipments, how do you receive them, how do you manage them, and how do you deliver them to the appropriate authorities as well. Despite all these efforts, as we know it, criminal syndicates seem undeterred. PSI, together with our members, have actually been carrying out Operation Kovac for some time now. And we have seen a huge volume of dubious online sellers selling both on social media and marketplace. So PSI, together with our partners, operators like Lazada and other like-minded organizations, are working together to weed out criminal syndicates. But Malik, and to everyone else, before I just find a conclusion to this question, just to throw to the other speakers and to the other attendees, what I see as the post-COVID challenge. We know now billions of vials of vaccines are now being vaccinated for everyone. It's being delivered and eventually be vaccinated. What is the fate of these billions of empty vials, syringes, and needles? The sheer volume of destruction will be a destruction nightmare for everyone. What are the issues on medical waste? Will we see it, the richer countries dumping it on the poorer countries, and poorer countries eventually have to take this on as their problem? How do we go about managing this? And what about the outcome of the huge facilities built overnight, almost overnight, just to adhere to this ultra cold requirements? What is the outcome of those? How do we manage that? Again, like I mentioned, I'm just throwing this topic to everyone else just as to think about. We can circle back to this later. Yeah, so Malik, that's mine.
Yeah, I mean, a lot of things being discussed actually are also in question 2, which I'll be asking later on. But anyhow, Wei, maybe you want to add something else to what Ramesh have spoken, because as a major pharma company, I'm sure you have a lot of experience with in the supply chain.
Yes, thank you, Malik. Just one preface is appreciate the invitation from TAPA. I used to be a member of the board years ago, so it's great to be back in contact with a professional organization such as TAPA. I mean, what I'm going to do is I'm going to expand a bit on what Ramesh had to say about the supply chain and legitimate supply chain. For us, for our company, like most pharma companies, that means from manufacturing through transport, through forwarders, through, you know, into the airports, ground handlers, into warehousing along the way, to the hospitals, the clinics, and ultimately to the patient or the consumer. That's the legitimate supply chain. For us, everything outside of that is not the legitimate supply chain, and therefore the sanctity of that supply chain can be suspect, can be an issue. I think the main point I want to emphasize at this time is that the supply chain is not unidirectional. It is not from point A or from A to Z, and that's it. Most of us think of the supply chain as being unidirectional from the manufacturing to the consumer, and that's the end of it. In the pharma world, as in other industries too, you need to look for other gaps, other locations within a supply chain where there is risk. As an example, return goods. Every pharma company has a return goods policy. Let's say within 6 months of expiration, the distribution company, or the distributor, or the government can return the goods back to the manufacturer for a credit or some whatever is worked out with the manufacturer. And then usually what happens is in that process, it has to be destroyed. You know, if it's not been handled properly, if it's outside the temperature requirements for the product, you can't use it. It is substandard. It is not going to be used, and therefore, it should be destroyed. In that destruction process, there's a gap there because who's going to witness the destruction? Has it been destroyed? Who's witnessed the destruction? Can the return goods be used in any way by criminals? Of course. Of course, it's been something that criminals have done for decades and related to other sorts of commodities also. So I would say to you is that if you're involved in the legitimate supply chain, look beyond just delivery to the patient. Look for return goods. Look for goods that are going to be salvaged, going to be destroyed. Because what can happen is if no one witnesses that, there may be someone that is or a criminal that is thinking, no one's actually paying attention to this. I'm going to scoop up all these vials and I'm going to sneak them out and I'm going to resell these. And then you've got a resale of a substandard product into the supply chain with heaven knows what the repercussions of the results of that are. So when you are meeting on the issue of any sort of medicines or the supply chain, think about return goods too. I used to work at Microsoft years ago, same issue. Return goods or goods that weren't put into use, they had to be destroyed. We went to a destruction company in Singapore. I witnessed it, and it turned out the destruction wasn't complete. That actually there were valuable commodities components that could be rescued from that process and put back into play. That didn't happen. But my point is, you need to monitor this process from beginning to end, because if there's a gap in the risk anywhere, there can be a risk anywhere from manufacturing all the way to the consumer. There can be a risk. And so if there's a risk anywhere, if there's a gap in how the company handles that, and logistics companies and forwarders and all the other components, stakeholders of the supply chain, then criminals will find that and they'll exploit that. And my take on this is that since the company itself knows more about their product and the legitimate supply chain than anyone else, I think it's incumbent on the company to make sure they have an active role with the regulatory agencies in the country, law enforcement, with trade organizations such as the PSI and other entities too. And there is developed some sort of warning system that if something that is outside the legitimate supply chain is noticed, that there is a way to notify people that we can all work together and try to minimize that risk to all the citizens of the world.
You know, based on what have been spoken by your Ramesh and Ray, actually we are also doing question 2 at the same time, which is what solutions are essential to mitigate the risk that confront farmer firms and other stakeholders has already been touched by Ray and also by Ramesh. Maybe Selva, before you start, I mean, we just link the question 1 and question 2 together, but before Selva, you start, let's say, Sam, we have a poll for you to run. Maybe you want to run that first.
Yeah, sure. So on the screen, you can see there's a poll to ask what type of risk are you most concerned with regards to the vaccine? Yeah, please key in your answer. Yeah, perhaps while the poll is running, Malik, could you maybe answer to one of the questions that the attendees are asking?
Okay. We have a question from Amos Ang. The question is, which countries in APEC you see will be the highest theft risk on such vaccine transportation? And do you think heavy security guards going to be sufficient?
Malik, sorry, could you repeat the question? Sorry, could you repeat the question? Heavily impact in theft. Was it theft?
No. Yeah, I mean, which country in APEC you will see has the highest theft risk, right, for vaccine, and the use of security guard, will it be sufficient, or do you need more than that?
Yeah, I mean, my take is that even though theft is always an issue, my concern is more along the lines of the infiltration of the legitimate supply chain with maybe substandard or falsified product. In terms of looking at whether security guards are sufficient to minimize the risk, I mean, I think if it's just security guards, absolutely not. That's not going to work. I think it's more along the lines of what we do and BI does, which is we have internal standards, and ours are basically copied and pasted out of the TAPA, FSR, and TSR. So I think it's kind of a system where you've got CCTV cameras, obviously, and alarm systems, and limited access areas, and lockable cabinets. I think it's all in one. I would not rely strictly on security guards to take care or be the main way to minimize the risk. I think it's one option. And in terms of security guards, the quality of the guard force and the efficacy of what they do depends on their management. You've got to have a top-end management in the security guard force, and you've got to make sure your processes are such that if there's a need for any sort of movement of vaccine or any medicines from point A to point B within a certain country, that the witnessing of that process is consistent with the risk of that process, right? I mean, you can't tell a security guard, could you please go over to this area? Here's the key. Could you get some samples for me and bring them back? When in fact, probably the best way to do that is probably have two people do it. Maybe one is not a security guard to witness it. Maybe have somebody inside. So the key is to review your security standards within your company, whether it's logistics or it's pharma company, and make sure it minimizes the risk, which means you have to ask yourself, what is the risk of having a security guard, just a security guard or two security guards? So I think it's an all-in-one situation. As an example, if we were involved in a secure locker situation or storage facility, I would never send a security guard. It would never go inside. It may be outside, maybe monitoring movement. There needs to be a logbook. But in fact, you would have to have more trusted persons or employees that actually manage that particular location, and with backup to confirm any sort of movement of product. So I think the answer is no. Not security guards are good to have. They're very useful. They have their place. One small piece.
Right.
Yeah. Okay.
If I can just add on to that, Malik, sorry, just add on to that. All right. So when you compare theft cases as well, LATAM, the region in the LATAM area is a lot more prone for instances of theft when you compare to APEC, Asia Pacific. But again, without name and shame any countries in particular, I think we have to look into areas where they have a very weak border controls, very weak FDA controls from the Food and Drug Administration, and also those who do not have a very secured integrity supply chain. So if they don't have it, regardless whether if you put a mere security guard there, it wouldn't help. This is what Ray was also trying to say. You have to make sure that your whole integrity is tight, And obviously then you must have an audit solution in place as well, where you carry out regular audits just to ensure. And take away security guards, I think these officers need to be gazetted officers so that they know what the duties are. They have to understand what the duties are and carry out effectively. Yeah, so without naming any countries, this is how I would approach the topic.
I think every country, it isn't just a black and white theft of a vaccine. I mean, it can be a transnational sort of movement of vaccine from one country to another. And there's no country in the region that is immune from having some part in that. Maybe one country, the specialty is bonded warehouses and then free trade zone. Maybe it's brought into that country for transshipment to another country in the region. So I think we have to kind of think outside the box of what the risk is and where the risk can occur. Where the risk is going to be, which country has the highest risk, I would want you to think every country can suffer because there's so much money to be made. I'm not comfortable naming one country because in my mind, it can happen in any country. And that's how the risk assessment process should work. We shouldn't discount that it can't happen, in this country, but it can happen in this country. All countries are subject to penetration by or be a victim of theft or the movement of falsified products into the marketplace.
Yeah, so yeah. I guess it's not just the transit risk. We are also looking at static risk and also integrity of the staff, yeah?
Yeah, so Malik, if I can add some to whatever the two gentlemen have actually said.
Yes.
I think it's a hybrid situation. When I look at the question here by the floor and also what we are talking about today. So generally, if you talk about coal supply chain, security in coal supply chain, if you see or if you have dealt with it, you will realize that not all security features or measures are also applicable. I've done audits on warehouses where I've seen CCTVs being installed in cold rooms. And unfortunately, when you actually do a run of the camera, you can't actually see anything because it's totally fogged up. And then you also have situations where companies actually want to give outlook to pharma organizations, especially because, as you know, in pharma, the value is high, the volume is low. So considering and taking care of such items actually requires a lot more investments. So where I'm coming to is actually driving all of us towards the point of looking at the current standards that are available in globally today. So we have the PSI standards, we have the TAPA standards, but TAPA standards doesn't actually really cover every facility that we are talking about here. Because for cold chain facilities, yes, you have the externals that is covered, but internally you need to look at it from being on the ground. And also when you talk about the transportation, because when I look at the question, which country has the highest theft risk? Some of you might be thinking in your mind, do we actually need to have escorted guards? I would not neglect that option at this moment, because to be honest, the vaccine situation today in APEC, which I would be looking at particularly, we are hoping that all governments would make it available for everybody. That's the situation that we are all hoping for. And that's what I see as a trend coming in all the countries. Most governments are coming forward to take over this vaccine. But then again comes the question of what if after some time, this starts to become a private concept, then the risk is going to start to build up for people. And so we're talking about heavy security guards. Is it sufficient? It's not armed security guards that we are talking about here. I would think more of trained security guards, like what Ray was telling. We have guards who have got SOPs, but they do not understand or know what the SOP is supposed to mean. So generally look at your standards, look back into your own company organizations. You need to have a system to follow. Hopefully you have already instituted your own internal third-party supplier audit programs. I think this is something that's very critical. No matter how big a player you are in the market, that you keep a watch on who is supporting you. So look at this kind of internal programs first. and then start to build on the standard that you have globally available. So I just wanted to add that a little bit. Yeah.
One more comment on that. I mean, when we've seen thefts before, not only at Lilly, but before when I was at other companies, the thefts, they can happen anywhere. They can happen in a warehouse. But basically, we see a lot of thefts happening in transit, right? In the back of a truck. In a truck, there's a hijacking of a truck, right? And then the product can be taken off there from the truck. So I think that when you go through a risk assessment exercise to determine where the risk is and how to mitigate that, you've got to look at all pieces of it, and not just one piece. It's got to be all encompassing. And so when we get involved, when my company gets involved in risk assessment, we create this huge chart. We know, especially in the movement, let's say the vaccine or our treatments for COVID-19, that this is all the different steps and what are the risks in these areas, and what can we do about that? And then do we notify are we involved in meetings with the regulatory agency to help them help us? Who else has a role in that too? And so I think that's important. I think right now, if you look at this situation from 20,000 feet, we are just getting started. Right now, these issues that we see in front of us are relatively organized and kind of civilized, right? I mean, there's product being launched in the US and the EU, and there's product in Singapore and other parts of the world, and other companies are now getting involved. Sinopharm is going to bring product into Africa and other parts of Asia. So it's just getting started. Where the risk is really, really high is when all of a sudden you've got the movement of the informal supply chain, the illegitimate supply chain. Just like I read an article in the Washington Post a couple of days ago about the availability of vaccine from Sinopharm in the Philippines. It's not approved yet for the Philippines. But my point in mentioning that is that now is the time to sort out if you're involved in any way in this process. If you're involved as a forwarder, DHL as an example, if you're involved in logistics and ground handling at an airport, now's the time to put together a task force, reach out to the customer, and make sure everyone is comfortable for your process. Now, no matter how competent your company is, and lots of companies in logistics are very, very competent. I can't think of one that I consider to be not competent. They're all very, very competent. It doesn't mean they've got the solution that matches what the customer requires. So I think now's a good time. If you're involved in any way in this movement, you need to reach out to your customer and make sure they understand your model and make sure you understand what the expectation is. Because if there is a problem, your company, logistics companies can lose a customer, or there may be something beyond that, like having to repay the customer for the product if it's lost as a result of their lack of appropriate support to minimize the theft. So I think now is the time to be engaged in these conversations. So I would.
Okay. Wei, thanks for that. I guess the answer from Wei and Selva actually covers the question number 2, right? What solutions are essential to mitigate the risks that confront pharma firms and other stakeholders? That's what Wei has been talking about, and Selva too. Ramesh, do you have something to add to question 2 before we move on?
Yeah, I think just to add on to, I'm not going to expand on any of them. I think it's quite important. I just want to say that, we have to take advantage of what the technologies that is available, and of course work together with the regulatory agencies, industry organizations, international organizations, agencies as well, like WHO, law enforcement, like Interpol, Europol, to combat fakes. This is something just I want to add on, but I understand as I'm saying this, I also acknowledge that, what an almost impossible task it is to work with law enforcement agencies to make them understand what kind of benefits it would bring to them if they were to work with the private sector. So I think this is one of the ways that I think education and outreach is also one of the ways that I think, for me, solution. This is what I'm saying is that beyond what Silva and Rail have mentioned.
Yeah.
Okay, thanks. In line with that, we have a question actually from Frankie. He's asking, in case the vaccine is actually obtained by criminals, do they have the capability to manage the cold chain environment? And will they further distribute this? What is the effect then? that I
Okay.
think
Maybe
that is
I will
something.
take this very quickly. I'll just take
Okay.
this very quickly since it's around surrounding criminals. I mean, not that I'm a criminal, but dealing with
you've seen
criminals
enough.
a fair bit. But yeah, well, I would say this: do not underestimate the criminal fraternity. They are quite capable of doing as good or better than what we can do. Having said that, if they have the possibility of ensuring it and keeping it in a minus 70 degrees, they can carry on to deliver. But this is my point. If they are a criminal syndicate, there is no need for them to keep it under 70 degrees. They will just keep it in a bucket and they just carry it around. And if you are keen to buy it from any dubious sources, knowing well fact how you can supposed to get it, then obviously they will be successful. Right? So they don't have to actually keep it in a minus 70 degrees,
Yeah,
even though they can.
that is where he was saying, legitimate supply chain. So you
Yeah.
need to work with well-known companies.
Yeah, I can
I mean,
give an example of a situation, because my day job is I am working in a pharma company, and I think people on this call, some of you, my friends from Philippines, you know that there are shabu shabu shops that goes around where medications are being sold, and we have seen ourselves, no names mentioned, but products that are kept at temperatures that we are just talking about here. It's not difficult to get a freezer. If you think it's impossible, it's not impossible. It is possible to get minus 70 degrees freezers, even though they are all registered or they need to be having some kind of authorization. But you can actually get your hands on them. And these equipments don't come with the maintenance at the back. So that's where when you're doing security, you're not just only looking at how you protect the product, you're also looking at how the product is actually being delivered. So when you look at the maintenance of some of these equipments, they are not even done. So when you are going and getting this from the shops, it looks really legitimate, but it's difficult. Sorry, Ray, go ahead.
yeah, I was just saying that we have to look at the basically the use of e-commerce portals for the movement of suspect product, because as long as there's a demand, whether it's maybe the infiltration of legitimate supply chain or a secondary supply chain, then the role of the internet e-commerce portals is quite huge. And especially when you get to the point like in the Philippines now, where there's offering of non-official supply chain products that are available and people reaching out. So it may be what you end up facing or confronting or seeing is the sort of illegitimate supply chain. If you go to any of the major business to consumer, business to business portals, you're going to find lots and lots of pharma products, and many of them are counterfeit, or many of them are suspect in some way. So there is, it's important, incumbent upon what we do, companies, is my company monitors the internet, the e-commerce portals every day, because we're looking for the availability of our products that are either generic, unapproved, or counterfeit, or suspect in some other way, maybe something that was stolen. So there is you got to confront the problem by looking beyond just the legitimate supply chain too.
Okay, thanks, guys. Maybe before we proceed to the next question, Sam, you want to share the result of the poll that we did?
I think it was
Yes,
shared. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah.
So now on the screen, we have quality damage to vaccine as the topmost concern risk, and a close fight on vaccine theft and loss.
Yeah, okay. I guess it's
Nobody cares about
consistent.
the environment.
A different webinar.
Yeah.
Well,
That'll
I
be our
guess
next webinar.
the finding is consistent with a lot of the participants. Most of them are actually.
Yeah, but maybe Malik, if you give me 1 minute, I would like to just touch a little bit on the environmental impact portion. Though not very relevant here, as we are security professionals on this call, but generally we still have a duty to play towards the operating environment that we are in. And one of the things about this medical waste, which I think Ray mentioned at the start of this, is that how are these waste sent back to the distributors, back to the waste collectors? In some countries, we do know there is no infrastructure for such waste to be damaged, to be burnt, to be incinerated. So what happens is these actually go back into landfill. Okay. So when I talk about landfill means they just pour your product into the ground and then that's it. It just goes into the ground. It's a totally different topic. It's nothing related with security, but it's environmental protection, it's environmental security. It will come back to us maybe 30 years, 40 years down the road. And that's where whatever Ray mentioned earlier about how do you manage your waste management? How is your waste consolidated? How do you ensure that your products, we have had incidents or we have seen incidents where even insider tradings happened. All right. The medical reps who are working for pharma companies who actually at times get a hand on this waste and actually use it to earn a little bit of a side income. And these are incidents that has happened because sometimes without an insider role, it's very difficult for regulated products or controlled products like this to just come out. It's not the old traditional way of stopping a lorry and hijacking it. It is beyond that because there's already inventory that is managed. So just wanted to touch a little bit more on that topic so that it's a little takeaway for the rest of us.
Thanks, Selva. Something for us to think about. Okay. Going to the third question, yeah, it's always, it's always been said that it's very important to share data. So my question is, what kind of data should be shared with whom and what kind of data should be shared? TAPA collect that data, PSI collect data. So can you guys maybe elaborate? So maybe with that data, we can actually avoid the situation that you mentioned earlier on. So anybody want to start on this?
Maybe... Okay, let me start. Let me start off first because data sharing is something that's very close to my heart as well.
Yes.
As we know, data is rapidly becoming the backbone of our infrastructure sector, right? We all know that we monitor data and it has the power to transform the way governments, planners, developers, owners, and operators manage the infrastructure, which can lead to dramatically improve the entire experience that we have. But we are currently in a very mixed economy in data ownership. What do I mean by mixed economy in data ownership? No one actually owns all the data required for any smart decision making. Some data is proprietary, like company data, census data. Some are open source and freely available, like those in the transport authorities. Traffic pattern data, those are freely available. Some are owned by private companies, some publicly available. But some are fractured across very different public entities. And then we know that private data of individuals themselves, which is very, very private, very sensitive data, is also something that we need. But data access and sharing also comes with several risks. We have to understand this both, and this risk is both to individuals and to organizations. This include the risk of confidentiality, privacy breaches, violation, and other legitimate private interests such as commercial interests as well. So this is especially a case where sensitive data is involved, and this sensitive data is what we are talking about right now, right? So all in all, my take is this: data sharing encourages more connection, encourages collaboration between researchers, which is also a result in important new findings, right? In short, but for us is that, the data that we secure, we sieve through the whole data and then we pack it and then we give it to the appropriate authorities. With that information, instead of just running a small district operation, they can then perhaps carry out a global operation. So obviously, the way we manage the data and how we give it to them is important. But at the end of it, we must understand the value add that it brings to any organization who collects and disseminates, and that organization which receives and acts upon. Right. So that's my short take on that.
Yeah. Okay. Clearly, the data that is being compiled by PSI is different from what is being compiled by TAPA. Maybe Selva, you want to elaborate a bit on the data that is being compiled by TAPA?
Yeah, so I mean, currently what we have in TAPA, which all of you are familiar with here, is our IIS reporting. And this is something that has been around for some time. And we are also getting in reports lately And if you have been actually going back to look at our websites, we have been also getting information from open source, verifying it and uploading it into the database so that this is actually also helpful and useful for the members. So maybe what I can do is I saw there's actually a question here, which is saying that has there been cases of theft or diversion already? So currently, from a TAPA standpoint perspective, we have not received any such reports yet officially, but generally what we encourage is companies to come in to share with us what they have actually learned from it, so that at least we would be able to know what is a typical way of operating, the modus operandi of all these kind of scenarios, which actually gives you members and also people out there information to know and understand what exactly happens during such things. So maybe that also helps to answer that question there at the moment from Hannes.
Okay, thanks, Salva. I guess we'll move on to the last question. Yeah, the last question is: what other supply chain issues and concerns do you foresee in the coming month? Before you answer this, there's also a question from Andy Lau. The question is cold chain tracking and IoT sensors are essential to the success of COVID-19 vaccine? Maybe we can put them together into the question about the supply chain issues. Maybe Ray, you want to pick up on this?
Yeah, I think it is important. I mean, as an example, now all our shipments, we refrigerated products, we track 24/7. I mean, we know it's on the high seas. We know the temperature is controlled within the parameters of the product. So we do track that. So it's extremely important from a quality perspective to ensure that the product is transported and handled as required. And that's why our partners, the forwarder and others that are involved in that process, we have to, we ensure with them that is done. And we have the capability of looking at any given pallet, any given shipment, any given time container to make sure that it conforms to our requirements. Because from our end as a business, if anything isn't done properly, then we basically can't use it. If it's outside the parameters for the product in terms of temperature, then we can't use it. It gets discarded. It gets destroyed, right? It can be millions of dollars from a business perspective. And also you can't give it to patients because it's been destroyed. So it's extremely important to us. Where we lose a direct vision of the product is when it gets to distribution. When we give it to the distribution company or distributor, handles it, warehousing, and then on to the pharmacy or the medical clinic or the hospital, then it's up to them to ensure that the product is handled properly, because the business model is it's our product until it gets to this distributor. Once they get it, it's their product to handle, but within our requirements. But it's extremely important to monitor that, because number one, it's the right thing to do in terms of efficacy for the patient, and number two, regulatory agencies require it. If you don't do it and if you report it, you're in trouble, right? Or if there's any other issue and you don't report it, you're in trouble also. So it's really an important integral part of how we transport the product through our partners.
Okay. Again, anything else to add, Ramesh, Selva?
Yeah, when everybody's talking about end-to-end tracking, serialization, my thought on this is this: anything that is a printed asset can actually be reproduced by counterfeiters. With that understanding, then I would say that end-to-end serialization is actually a compliance solution as opposed to an anti-counterfeiting solution. So we shouldn't we shouldn't be in that notion that just because we have an end-to-end serialization, we monitor everything throughout the supply chain, everything is, we are running a tight ship. Because what you're actually doing is compliance. But what you need to have is that you need to have other measures in place just to make sure that whatever your compliance action is actually adhering and preventing counterfeits from coming in.
Okay. We discussed a few things before this webinar. One of the things is the sustainability. Shipping, trucking cargoes at very high temperature of -70. After this event, what do you think will happen with all this stuff? So there'll be a redundancy of of resources. Yeah. Anyone want to pick up on this? Otherwise, we can just.
No, I think before we start, I think Ray had something to say. Ray, you wanted to say something?
I was going to. I saw that there was one question from the audience about have we seen any instances of theft or diverted product in the in the marketplace or the supply chain? I'm not quite sure how it's worded, but so far I've not heard or seen any theft of product that's been diverted into to a different country or to an illegitimate supply chain. But it's only a matter of time before thefts do occur, and it becomes an issue from a quality perspective. I mean, if it's been stolen, let's say in transit in a truck, the thief isn't going to have a refrigerated lorry that he's going to pull up next to the other truck, take it out. He's just going to throw it in the back of a truck. So that's when you have issues in terms of quality. But the issue on the issue of diverted product, counterfeit or sham product always masks itself as diverted product. So when you hear from a scammer, a fraudster, criminal, yeah, we have diverted product, we've got the vaccine in country in Asia, and it comes, we're able to buy extra product out of the UK and we brought it into country XYZ in Asia. That's the way that counterfeit substandard product gets into the marketplace. So very rarely is it a situation where that product is diverted, because in many ways, many products, the pricing nowadays, I can't speak for all companies, it can be universal. There can be differences in pricing, but there isn't a business reason to buy a product, let's say a certain product in Malaysia, and then say and sell it in Thailand and say it's been diverted, it's from Malaysia, because the pricing difference doesn't support doing that. So in that kind of situation, it can be suspect. So what I'm saying to you is that when you come across any instances or any discussions or any sort of inquiries by the government, regulatory agencies about diverted product, we hear it's in the marketplace, you have to ask yourself more questions like, is it really diverted or not? Could it be counterfeit? Could it be another vaccine? They've changed the label, which we've seen before the vaccine, where they'll change the label on a different product, and then you've got something that says it's this. In fact, it's a different vaccine. So whenever you see that, to emphasize that, when you see diverted in any sort of conversation, think suspect fraudulent. That's what you think about, and not so much that it's legit and it's okay to take. The Philippine situation with the Sinopharm product, it's going to be available, in the legitimate supply chain. Oh, it sounds great. I can get it early. I can just pay a little bit of money for it. It's fine. You don't know whether it's diverted, counterfeit, or something else. You have no idea what's in there. And that's why the illegitimate supply chain is something that the government should focus a lot of attention to. And then in conjunction with the companies and all logistics companies on addressing the issues of the risk to the legitimate supply chain. You actually have to have a plan that addresses both aspects of that, both the illegitimate and the legitimate at the same time.
Yeah, okay, thanks, Wei. That question also was answered by Selva just now, saying that TAPA have not received any reports of any case of theft or diversion so far. Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, we have come to the end of this webinar. We can open to the audience. Sam, if anyone has any question to ask, please feel free, unmute yourself. There is one question from Cecilia Fan. There is a possibility to gather intelligence here by working with the distributor of cold chain equipment. I guess there can be any. Maybe Selva, you want to pick on this?
Yeah, I think that's a good point. I think that's a good point to take note, because we also know, being in pharma line, you will understand that in terms of suppliers for cold chain equipments, it's very limited. So if somebody is buying it, normally it comes with certification. You need to submit your pharma registration. There's a lot of processes that goes behind it. But remember one thing, as so much as we said that, there are equipments that have also been removed out of service and have been sent to, I can't say which countries, where they are actually being used in probably a coffee shop to actually keep Coca-Cola or 7-Up. So these are possible. All right. As much as it sounds a little funny, but the truth behind it is it's a opportunity for anyone who sees it. So for a criminal, this is an opportunity. I have a freezer, it works, whether it's calibrated, whether it's in the maintained, that's besides the point. So
Yeah.
it's good. And this is something that I would think that the pharma companies do their due diligence in taking stock or checking in with their suppliers and vendors how their equipments are and what's happening when they actually decommission any equipment from them. So good point from
Yeah.
that individual, Cecilia.
Yeah. I
Yeah,
mean,
I hope it answered.
yeah.
Yeah,
Sorry,
go
what
ahead.
we've seen over the years is that, we visited the same question going back in counterfeit drugs going back 20 years. I mean, even beyond 20 years, because we used to have the same question that relates to pill presses, right? Or various pieces of mixers for pharmaceuticals. And it was always, well, where are the traffickers getting that kind of equipment? And the answer is the used equipment arena probably competes quite vigorously with the new product arena or businesses in terms of supplying equipment that's necessary for for whatever processes they're trying to duplicate. So, and back then we went to legitimate companies trying to understand the big players in different parts of the world, and then we found that going to various websites in some countries in Asia that you could buy equipment there, and basically the same equipment, maybe 2 or 3 years old, right? And it relatively cheap, and it could do exactly the same thing. So sometimes it's some intel is available, but not much intel about the secondary or used equipment availability.
All right, thanks, Ray. I hope
Sorry,
it
Malik,
answers. Yeah,
sorry.
yes,
Just a quick-
Ramesh.
I mean, while we are talking about the theft and illegal diversion to the earlier question, I think even though we all agree that we have not seen or heard of no known cases, but I can just share with you that currently during our monitoring, we have already identified thousands of website marketplaces, social media already started selling vaccines. Even though it could be big scam and frauds, but some of them they're holding pictures of it. So there is a possibility of that coming in and trying to flood the market. It need not be a theft case or an illegal diversion case. Yeah. So that's the point I wanted to mention.
Okay, thanks. Hope you answered Cecilia's question. We have another question from Aaron. Aaron, you have been unmuted. Maybe you want to ask the question yourself.
Yeah, thank you very much, and an absolute excellent webinar. So really did value all the input. So the question I had was around beyond criminal syndicates and whether we're seeing small pockets of populations that are against the vaccine because of where it's originated from in terms of its manufacturing. So for example, in Pakistan, there's certainly distrust against the Chinese vaccine. Even in other developing nations like Indonesia and Brazil. And we've even seen incidents against Western vaccines that have been supplied or distributed around country. So I just wondered if there was more of a risk of those extremist groups targeting or sabotaging supply beyond criminal syndicates who are looking to redistribute the vaccine.
Okay, let me start with this first, and then Ray or Silva can start on. I think, I know for a fact that there will be such pockets all over the world. People who do not want to get vaccinated or prefer one form of a vaccine versus the other. There would be, and where there is such an apprehension against such vaccination, there will be syndicates who have, or there will be groups who have either with them. I don't think it will be original, obviously. Could be fake counterfeits with them, and they would try to sell it. So in short, yes, there will be such pockets. But again, I think the caveat messaging, being ex-law enforcement, I would say is that, everyone, regardless of their interest in what vaccine you want, please get it from non-dubious sources, from original sources. That's my short take. Ray, you can expand on this.
Yeah, I mean, so far, Aaron, I've not seen any reporting that addresses that issue. There's always, as Ramesh said, I mean, we expect it because it's just a matter of time, because there's going to be that kind of reaction to it all over the world and to varying degrees in different countries. But so far in what I monitor, which is mainly all of is Greater Asia, in Australia and New Zealand, I've heard from little to no chatter about that as an issue. I think as we progress closer to the availability of the vaccine in every country, then you may see this rev up. For example, I know that Australia is soon, if not now, or is soon to get vaccine. You may see some pockets of that kind of thinking there, but right now we are monitoring for that. But right now we haven't seen that.
Yeah. I mean, maybe to just close off the comments, from a strategic perspective, I would focus on the manufacturing facilities who are involved in this particular vaccine production, because this is what's going to be, or that's going to be where the source is. And this comes back again to your facility security standards. So having a manufacturing side and having facility security standards to take care of this would actually put the controls in to prevent any sabotages of this kind of topics that we are talking about. So yeah, I think that should sum up.
All right, thanks. We are almost reaching 3 o'clock, but I think we can overrun a bit. Yeah, you guys is okay? I mean, you guys are okay with that? We have another question. The focus is always have been on vaccine. We have a question from Desmond. Desmond, if you are unmute, maybe you want to ask the question yourself.
Yeah, thank you for the panelists for this great session. So while we are discussing on the security control for vaccine today, is there a similar topic being discussed or being in attention for a test kit? For example, the antigen test kit. Thank you.
Again, it's always vaccine. Now he's asking about test kit. So
I think this, you have to take this because this is a TAPA event. Would you be looking at devices as well? Or
yeah, I mean, so other than vaccine, which is also in the in the discussion now, right? You have the test and you have the vaccine to prevent the virus.
So if you're looking at medical devices, Desmond, I think that's the question.
Yeah.
So generally,
but Desmond, just out of curiosity, is there any particular angle that you're looking at that where this general topic would not be able to cover in terms for test kits? I mean, yes, we are talking about test kit versus and vaccines, but in the general scope of understanding, is there anything in particular that you think that would have missed being addressed here?
No. I do not have any specific topic here. I mean, in particular angles.
Okay.
Yeah.
And I think your worry or concern is about dubious test kits, right? Things that are sold.
Yes, you're right, Selva.
Yeah. So I think at the moment, what's happening is, if you look at it from industry perspective, a lot of these test kits are actually controlled. They are not sold openly in the public yet. So they are still controlled items. But this issue, as you have asked very correctly, will start the moment this starts to become free and easy. Which means to say, if you can actually buy a test kit over the counter, that's where your medical devices issues are going to start going out of hand. And I think, Desmond, if I know you, I think you would have seen, or you would have already felt some of this in other products, other medical devices that we have seen. So generally at the moment, it's not an issue yet. It's not a cause yet because of the fact that it's still under control. But eventually, I think it's something that we need to think about, how these things would be duplicated in the black market.
Okay, thanks for that.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Yes, thank you very much.
Just one last question. The question is from an anonymous attendee, unnamed attendee. Since this is a national project, will it be any? I think the question got to be rearranged a bit. Yeah. Since this is a national project, will it be any police escort armed guard arranged while the distribution may be performed by private sectors? I guess he's asking, since the distribution will be done by private sectors, will there be any police escort armed guards? Something to that effect, I guess.
I mean, if I'm trying to understand the question, it seems like his the query is whether will the governments put in additional escorts and guards and by the police to make sure that the products go. But from a private sector perspective, I think if pharma companies, I can't answer it because it's not something that my company does, but generally we would have a cold chain which would be controlled, and depending on which country and the risk level, that's where the additional controls come in from a security perspective.
Yeah. But,
So
I mean,
like what Ramesh said, in LATAM, you definitely can't walk out of a facility without armed guards. But in Singapore, it's different. So it's very difficult to measure this apple to apple, but it has to come back again to your fundamentals, your risk assessments.
you know, every country is different in terms of that obviously of that question, and it's, you know, it's a very complex supply chain from one country to another, and I would be surprised to find that the product would go from manufacturing to the government of a particular country. They may have some role in ordering the product up through the regulatory agency. They may be involved somehow in coming up with requirements for the shipment of the product into the country. But most of the time, it's going to go through basically a civilian supply chain. It's going to come into the airport. There's going to be ground handlers. There's going to be a customs process, maybe a regulatory process. And even if the government is involved in some way in the movement, and when it gets down to being distributed to a civilian hospital, the government's not going to have any role in that. They're going to probably cause a shipment of the product from a warehouse somewhere to a hospital, and so that's, you know, so the government's role in most countries will be based on the risk in that country. In some countries where hijacking is a big issue, then obviously the government may be more involved. In other countries, like most of the countries in ASEAN, it's not that much of an issue. There may be some, a little bit, but not a big issue.
Yeah, okay, thanks. I guess it's on a case-to-case basis depending on the country. And also, I guess from the insurance perspective, whilst in transit, security guards will be a requirement, I guess. Okay, we have come to the end of this discussion webinar. It's been 1 hour of very full of information. Hopefully, everybody have gained something from this. Thank you to the panelists and thank you to everyone who has attended. As Samantha has mentioned, if anybody has questions, you can ask, you can send to TAPA. Thank you very much to everyone.
Thank you, everyone. Have a good 2021.
Yeah.
Thanks, everyone.
Have a good day.
Thank you for joining the webinar on vaccine impact, heightened security risks on pharma supply chains and cargo theft. We hope you have enjoyed the webinar. If you have any questions and feedback, please feel free to contact TAPA, PSI, and Eli Lilly. We look forward to see you at our next webinar. Goodbye.